Hi guys, and welcome to today's video, where today I'm going to go through all the equipment, supplements, substrate, the whole shebang, what I use with my leopard geckos. I know a lot of people have been asking me to do this, and though I do have a video, like a leopard gecko shopping list, where I list all the supplies you'll need, I know some people want to know specifically what I use and what I would recommend. Now if you want to know what I'll be using in my bioactive leopard gecko tank, that may differ slightly from some of the stuff I use on the regular, so I will link that video below and you can check it out. But let's start off with vivariums. Now everyone asks me what I use. I actually have two different types. I have two by Viv Exotic, two that are kind of generic vivariums. I believe one has Terrapod on the glass. I'm not overly fussed by the particular brand. All I wanted was like a 2-foot long wooden vivarium. As you may have seen though on my channel, Diego is getting an upgrade, and that particular tank comes from Custom Reptile Habitats. I hope to eventually upgrade all of the geckos tanks to those particular ones. Despite using wooden vivariums, I don't actually have an issue with glass terrariums or anything. I think it's just over here, wooden vivariums are so easy to get and actually fairly cheap, far cheaper than glass Exoterra ones, so that might be why you see me use a lot more wooden vivariums with my leopard geckos, and then glass tanks with like my arboreal species. A little addition you may notice on my vivarium doors are door wedges. These help to keep the doors nice and secure. You don't actually have to use them, especially if you don't really have anyone going up to the tanks and maybe opening them. I don't even have that. But they're good indicators to me when I look around the room that all the doors are shut, all the doors are locked, everything is good. These are just generic door wedges. I know some brands have now come out selling them, but I got these on eBay fairly cheap. You can get them on Amazon fairly cheap as well. I also sometimes use them to point at food. If you've seen my video on how to improve your gecko's aim, they come in very handy for that. Next, substrate. Now this is always an interesting one. I use EARTHMIX ARID, and I have for quite a while now. This is a bioactive or bioactive ready substrate. Unfortunately, this is one of Arcadia's products that isn't available in the US, but there are alternatives, like the Biodude has a more bioactive substrate for leopard geckos, so that could be something you could look into. I will say pretty much all of the other items I mention from now on, besides the Habitat equipment, can be found in the US, and I know I have a lot of my audience come from America and even Canada as well, and I'll leave some links to shops below so you might be able to find some of the similar products I use. Next, let's look at supplements. So I use EARTHPRO-A and EARTHPRO-CALCIUMPRO-MG. That's a long name. EARTHPRO-A is more of the multivitamin, but unlike normal multivitamins that contain synthetics, this one's actually non-toxic. It cannot be oversupplied. Your gecko cannot overdose on it because there aren't any synthetics in it. So you can actually use it with most feedings. I tend to put the calcium in the tank and use on occasional feedings, especially if the female geckos are eating during the time they're like producing eggs, like they like to do every year. I will make sure they do have that calcium. But as I mentioned, EARTHPRO-A does not include any synthetics like synthetic D3, so you do have to use a UV light if you're using these supplements. This moves me on to lighting. Now before I talk about what UV I use, I did see this in a comment on a previous video, and I have seen this happen a few times and it's quite worrying. But basically, some people will put their tanks up near their window thinking when the sun shines through, it's given their gecko UVB. In your standard windows in your house, UVB won't travel through it, okay? And it certainly won't travel through the window and then the gecko's doors, and you know, don't do this because it's not working. Not only that, but when you put your gecko right near a window and the sun is beaming through, it can easily overheat the entire tank and there's nowhere for your gecko to escape. So this isn't a great thing to do. It's not going to benefit your gecko in any way. Just try to put it in a place where it gets bright, nice light in your room, but not direct sunlight. Anyway, I used the 7% UVB SHADEDWELLER by Arcadia. I originally used the 2.4%, but then they came out with the SHADEDWELLER, and that actually suited my tank better because you need the percentage depending on like the depth of your tank, and basically if you have more of a shallow tank, 2.4% may be better for you, but since my tanks are quite high, 7% was better. I'll leave a link below to a lighting guide so you can figure out what will be best for your size tank. Anyway, for the UV, I actually use timers, so the UV can come on 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. The timers I used to use back in the day were analog ones, and when you have 1 or 2, it's not an issue. They make a little sound, but it's not an issue. When you have 6, you get used to it, but once they all turn off, you're like, I haven't known silence in so long, because they make this just really annoying little sound. So I did switch to digital ones. They're a bit more expensive, but I prefer them. The only downside I will say, and I don't know if anyone else has noticed this when they use digital timers, is that for some reason I can set them all to the same time, but over the course of a few months, one will just be like 5 minutes behind or 5 minutes ahead. There's always like a 5-10 minute difference, even though they were all once set at the same time. I don't know why this is, I don't know why this happens, but yes, I use the digital timers to bring on my UV lamps. I think this is good rather than just manually turn them on, because then your gecko gets a consistent sort of day-night cycle. They sort of know when their light's going to come on, so it's not like, oh, I just woke up at like midday and I'm going to now turn them on. Like, you use a timer and it's all good. Even though I do put them on 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, technically you could put them on for 10 to 12 hours throughout the day if you wish. My room, as I said, is quite bright, so the geckos can distinguish day from night, but if you don't have that, you can always, as I said, put 10 to 12 hours on of UV, or the 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, and in the middle of that you put on an LED light. Next is heating. So in 2 of my tanks I use a deep heat projector. Diego will soon be getting one in his new tank. I really want to give Gizmo one, but if you've seen how I've had to install the deep heat projectors in my wooden vivariums to make them high enough so the geckos can't just touch them, I've had to drill a hole in the top, and the top of the light actually, or at least the light fixture, sticks out the top of the vivariums, and this isn't possible in Gizmo's tank because she has Drogo's terrarium on top of her, so there's just not the room, but I really want to give her a deep heat projector as soon as I can. Anyway, with these deep heat projectors I have to use a Habitat dimming stat. So this is a dimming thermostat. As I said, Habitat isn't available in North America, so you may have to find alternatives, but dimming thermostats tend to be best for deep heat projectors. In my other 2 tanks, I currently use a 6x11 inch 7-watt heat mat by Habitat. You don't have to get the exact same size as me, of course, because the mat is meant to cover 1/3 to 1/2 of the floor space, so get a size that is appropriate for your tank. Now with the heat mats, I use mat stats from Habitat also. These are actually pretty inexpensive and very reliable, so I'd highly recommend them. Sometimes I get kind of self-conscious when I repeat the brands that I use. Like, obviously you'll notice I use Arcadia and Habitat a lot, because I always, like, this comes up sometimes where people are like, oh, you're clearly, you might be getting paid to say this, or it sounds like I'm a sales rep, and honestly it's not. It's just, when you've owned leopard geckos as long as I have, you have seen tech over the years, you have tried different things, you have experienced bad brands and you've experienced good brands, and you've realised which ones are reliable and which ones always produce high standard equipment, and then you tend to just stick with them because you know what you're going to get with them. I can tell you that microclimate, I had the microclimate B2ME stat, which dimmed at night, and that was awful. And that's why you don't hear me talking about that, because I'm not gonna, like, I had such a bad experience. I spent over £200 on 4 microclimate thermostats. They all broke on me. I sent them away to be repaired. They sent me them all back and said there's nothing wrong with them. And luckily, I think I've mentioned this in a video before, but luckily Minnie wasn't in the tank when I was testing it. The one they sent back that said it's totally fine, it works, I put on my heat mat, I set it to the thermostat to 30, and because the thermostat didn't work, the heat mat shot up to 60 degrees Celsius. So, like, there are, like, things I've used, and I have a video on, like, good and bad reptile products, but, like, over the years you just get to know brands that you know are reliable, you know you're going to get good stuff from. And I think that's why you'll hear me go on about Arcadia and Habitat all the time, because I've just learned that these are good brands that I'm always happy with their products. So that's why I recommend them, I guess. Anyway, rant over. For measuring the heating, I use thermometers with probes, of course. I actually get generic ones off of eBay. I do like to test them beforehand, and I have a laser thermometer so I can double check everything, but so far so good. They're actually quite accurate and very inexpensive. I think the last thing to really cover would be decor, so plants, water bowls, backgrounds, hides. I have some setups, like in Ziggy's tank, all the hides are made of slate and rock and cork, so that's not really a brand, like that's just nature. In Minnie's tank is a similar setup, but one of her hides is actually a fake rock by rockways.co.uk. I know a lot of you ask where my backgrounds and fake rocks are from. They're from, the ones in my current tanks are from Rockways. Unfortunately, I don't think they deliver to the US. However, if you've seen me unbox Diego's tank and you've seen those fake rocks and those fake backgrounds, that's from Custom Reptile Habitats, and that is in the US, so you could get something similar if you wanted to. But in terms of decorations kind of change. I don't think I have particular brands I would say you definitely need to get that. It's all like personal choice. You might get one that's from Exoterra, you might get one from Zoom Edge, you might get a generic fish one, as long as it's big enough. It's really up to you. Same with plants, just make sure they're all safe. With hides, just make sure you have enough, make sure they're safe, sturdy and spacious. So I think that's everything. I'm sure I probably missed something else, so you might have to let me know below if I have. But yeah, it's pretty much all the things I use in my Leopard Gecko setups. So I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you haven't already, please subscribe. But thank you for watching, guys, and goodbye.